Welcome to another look at an area of interest in the Kanto region. If you aren't familiar with what this little series is, I basically pick a place that I find interesting in the Pokemon universe and try to look at every aspect of it. Like the game up to that point, what the townspeople or other NPCs say, what wild Pokemon can be found, etc. So far, I've only remained in Kanto, but I mean, it's where it all started, and I think it has a bunch of places of interest. I've done Lavender Town, Cinnabar Island, the Power Plant, and Mount Moon, so do check those out if you haven't done so. And as always, a huge Saffron City-sized thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Check all of that out at the end of the video or below if you want to join. For now, let's look at one of the more unique areas in all of the original games, as I try to take you back to the late 90s. Pretend this is your first time experiencing these games. By the midpoint of your journey through Red and Blue or Yellow, you've acquired some gym badges and likely have a pretty set team of friends that you've chosen to complete your journey with. Only 3 or 4 gym badges remain depending on where you've been, but there's one city to the south that you have not been to, and it appears that there are 2 paths to reach it. You can go west of Celadon City to reach Cycling Road and routes 16, 17, and 18 with all of the scary bikers. Or go south of Lavender Town to routes 12, 13, 14, and 15 with a bunch of seaside fishermen and bird keepers. Whichever way you take, you'll eventually reach Fuchsia City, where Poison Leader Koga resides. But you'll also find that progression has pretty much come to a halt beyond here. You cannot cross bodies of water just yet, so you need to find some way to reach that island in the southwest. Exploring more of Fuchsia City and talking to the townsfolk, you'll learn about something called the Safari Zone, and notice that the city has what looks like a Pokemon zoo. Scattered throughout are small exhibits where you can look at some Pokemon, possibly being your first time ever seeing some of these or learning about their existence. Some move around and some just kinda sit there all day. You'll see Slowpoke, who is friendly and very slow moving, Lapras, aka the King of the Seas, Kangaskhan, a maternal Pokemon that raises its young in a pouch on its belly, Kabuto, or Omanite, a Pokemon that was resurrected from a fossil, Voltorb, the very image of a Pokeball, and finally, in the northeast corner, Chansey. Catching one is all up to chance. While some of these are likely pretty familiar, you have most certainly seen a Slowpoke or a Voltorb by this point, and maybe even obtained a Lapras. And you've heard some rumblings about resurrecting fossils, but what in the heck is a Kangaskhan or a Chansey? One old man wandering around confirms that these exhibits are indeed part of a zoo. Safari Zone has a zoo in front of the entrance. Out back is the Safari game for catching Pokemon. What does he mean by Safari game? Haven't you been catching Pokemon all along? Perhaps this Safari game is where you can acquire a Kangaskhan or Chansey too. Best to look into this. Continuing to wander, you'll also notice the Safari Zone Warden's home, but this lad is just speaking gibberish. What is even going on here? A couple other people say that this warden is old, he has false teeth, he has a speech problem, and the people have nicknamed him Slowpoke, as they both have a vacant look about them. Well now you just feel sorry for the guy, yikes. So basically, this city has a gym leader specializing in the art of causing toxicity and pain to your Pokemon. It has people mocking the elderly, tiny enclosures for Pokemon in captivity where they can barely move. I mean, look how much space is given to this 8-foot tall, 500-pound Lapras. All it can do is stare straight ahead all day. But the absolute worst part of this city, by far, is that they have let this place go and you have to annoyingly use Cut multiple times just to navigate around. Why are there so many tiny trees in the way? If they actually want people to come visit their depressed zoo, hire some landscapers. Imagine going to a real zoo and you have to bring your own hedge trimmers just to walk around. This city blows, man. Guess it's time to see what the Safari Zone or Safari game is. Upon entering the building to the north, you can speak to some workers. The first one explains what the Safari Zone actually is. Safari Zone has 4 zones in it. Each zone has different kinds of Pokemon. Use Safari Balls to catch them. When you run out of time or Safari Balls, the game's over for you. Before you go, open an unused Pokemon box so there's room for new Pokemon. Interesting. Different Pokemon in different zones, and it's timed, and you don't use the standard Poke Gray or Ultra Balls. And it's only 500 currency to enter, which is pocket change at this point. Then, you officially enter the Safari Zone. As I said in the beginning, this is one of the more unique places in the entire game. You are walking and catching wild Pokemon per usual, but you don't actually fight any of them or use your own Pokemon at all. You are the one who faces off against wild Pokemon here. When you encounter one, you are given 4 options. Use a Safari Ball, use bait, throw a rock, or run. Running away or using a Safari Ball are pretty self-explanatory. You've been doing both of these things all game. But having the options of using bait or throwing rocks is completely new here, and yeah, sounds pretty awful, honestly. Throw a rock? I mean, Jesus. Imagine going on an actual safari where you are not only encouraged to capture the wild animals, but someone at the entrance hands you a bag of food and a bag of rocks to whip at them. Wow, great, awesome. So since these are the only options you were given, how does it work from a game standpoint? Well, it doesn't actually outright tell you, but there is of course a formula to the whole thing. Essentially, it works like this. Each Pokemon has an invisible angry meter and an eating meter. Throwing bait increases the eating meter and resets the angry meter. Throwing a rock does the opposite. You are much more likely to catch a Pokemon if you've increased the angry meter, but they are also much more likely to run away. They are less likely to run away if they are eating, but harder to catch, and doing either increases this invisible counter. There is an actual mathematical formula that deals with an invisible number counter determined by what you threw at it and comparing it to the Pokemon's speed and catch rate, but basically that's how it works. There is an excellent rundown of exactly how it works on Dragonfly Cave, complete with an actual Safari Zone calculator, so I'll link that below if you're interested. The funny part is, they concluded that the best strategy most of the time is just to throw balls and not even bother with bait or rocks. Lower leveled Pokemon are easier to catch too. And as far as this Safari game being timed, that's not exactly accurate either. There's no countdown timer, but a step count of exactly 500 steps. Once you have walked across 500 in-game squares, you are instantly sent to the entrance and you can keep all of the Pokemon you caught. And, well, that's the gist of how the Safari game works. Scattered around are also some signposts and rest stops where you can talk to some people. A couple signs do inform you that the remaining time declines only when you walk, and you can press the start button to check the remaining time. Someone in a rest house tells you that they caught a Chansey, making it all worthwhile. Ah, so you can indeed find Chansey here. Another sign tells you that you can win a free HM for finding the secret house, while someone mentions that you can win a prize in the deepest part of the Safari Zone. Well, that sounds coincidental. Another sign was posted by the warden himself that a reward is offered if you find his gold teeth. Yeah, now things are starting to click. And, well, reaching that secret house is essential to completing the game, so you have to eventually find it. That's because your reward is the HM for Surf, allowing you to traverse bodies of water. Also, it's arguably the best water move in the game by balancing power and accuracy, so yeah, go get Surf immediately. As for the gold teeth, they are also essential because the warden gives you the HM for Strength as a reward. So then that obviously leaves, which Pokemon can you find in this place? Well, luckily there is a bit of variety here. In Red and Blue alone, you can find 16 different Pokemon just in the grass, but each game has one exclusive, so 15 different Pokemon per game. And if you choose to fish instead, there are 7 different ones to catch in the water. And what you'll find and how often you'll find them is also dependent on the quadrant you're in too, which consists of the center area and areas 1, 2, and 3. So basically, we have 23 Pokemon to go over, but you know, it's all part of the Safari Zone experience. I'll start with the ones that aren't exclusive here to the Safari Zone, or at least ones you've probably already encountered somewhere else. In all 4 zones, you'll pretty commonly find both male and female Nidoran, as well as their evolved forms of Nidorina and Nidorino. What's pretty crazy to me is that this is only the second and final place to find wild Nidoran in Red and Blue. It seems like they've been all throughout Kanto, but nope. At the very beginning of the game, if you wandered west of Viridian City, there's a little patch of grass on Route 22 where you can find both Nidoran at levels 2 to 4, and then that's it until the Safari Zone. You are much more likely to find the female Nidoran in the blue version on Route 22, and male in the red version. And the Safari Zone pretty much retains this for the most part. Nidoran female is the poison-type poison pin Pokemon with its original dex saying, although small, its venomous barbs render this Pokemon dangerous. The female has smaller horns. The differences between the Nidorans are pretty minimal, but statistically, the female version has higher HP and defense, while the male version has higher attack and speed. And I don't know, I always found it interesting that traditionally in our world, the colors of blue and pink represent male and female respectively, but it's flipped here with the female being blue and male being pink. Nidoran female are found in all 4 areas in the blue version 25% of the time, but at a much lower rate of 5% in the red version, and only in areas 1 and 3 in a level range of 22 to 25. It evolves into Nidorina at level 16, who is also found here. Nidorina is also the poison type poison pin Pokemon. The dex says, the female's horn develops slowly, prefers physical attacks such as clawing and biting. Just like a scared feral animal. Better throw some rocks at it. Nidorina is basically a bigger and stronger Nidoran, and yeah, it does indeed learn clawing and biting moves like Scratch, Bite, and Fury Swipes. It's a bit less common of an encounter than Nidoran at 10% in blue in all 4 areas, and only 5% in red in the 2 areas Nidoran female isn't found. Kinda weird, but alright. It's found at levels 30 to 33, so not bad. And of course, it evolves into Nidoqueen when exposed to a Moonstone. Which brings me to the male version of Nidoran, and really the levels and encounter rates are the exact same as the female, just flip them in red and blue. Nidoran male is also the poison pin Pokemon that stiffens its ears to sense danger. The larger its horns, the more powerful its secreted venom. And as I said, they tend to have higher attack and speed than the female, and to be honest, I've always preferred this evolution line. I think all 3 are just better designs, and I'd prefer higher attack and speed to HP and defense personally. They actually do learn a few different moves too. And just like Nidoran female, it evolves at level 16, this time into Nidorino, who is also found here. Similar to Nidorina, Nidorino just flips the encounter rates from blue and red, so not much more to say there. It is also the poison pin Pokemon. It is an aggressive Pokemon that is quick to attack. The horn on its head secretes a powerful venom. And it evolves into Nidoking when exposed to a Moonstone, my personal favorite of all the Nidos. The next repeat encounter here is actually my baby shroom boy, Paras. Oh yes. In red and blue, Paras is only found in Mount Moon and in the Safari Zone, so this is your chance to get a much higher leveled one at a range of 22 to 23. Wow, that's so powerful. And since I literally just talked about Paras ad nauseum in my Mount Moon video, and I'm claiming these all to be one series, I'll keep this brief. It's the bug grass type mushroom Pokemon that burrows to suck tree roots. The mushrooms on its back grow by drawing nutrients from the bug host. You'll find it in areas 1 and 2 15% of the time, and as we all know, it evolves into Paraspectre at level 24, the most obvious statement ever said out loud. Because, well, my dudes, you can most certainly find wild Paraspectre here in the Safari Zone. It's not even your birthday. Don't want to spend that time using Scratch over and over from a weak Mount Moon Paras in order to get to the king? Just wait it out and go straight to the source right here. Paraspectre is the mushroom Pokemon, a host parasite pair in which the parasite mushroom has taken over the host bug, prefers damp places. You can only find it in the center area and area 1 with a low 5% rate at levels 25 or 30. What an absolute gift this game has given you. There is not much more I can even say about Paraspectre at this point. Get ready to spore, slash, and solar beam your way to becoming the champion. The next one to talk about is kind of a strange one, just in the sense of where you find it. If you chose to get to Fuchsia City through Cycling Road, you would not have encountered a wild Venonat until the Safari Zone. If you went south of Lavender Town instead, you can find Venonat on all 4 routes of 12, 13, 14, and 15, and here in the Safari Zone. It's like they all migrated to southeast Kanto only. Venonat is the bug poison type insect Pokemon that lives in the shadows of tall trees where it eats insects. Wait, it is attracted by light at night. And yeah, I want to know what insects this insect Pokemon is eating. Like Weedle? Or other non-Pokemon insects in this world too? Does it eat ants? But yeah, I just think Venonat is fine. Never been one of my favorites or one that I think about much at all. It's only found in the center area in Area 3 15% of the time at levels 22 or 23. It evolves into Venomoth at level 31, so not too much further to go if you get one here. And in keeping with the pattern, you can also find Venomoth here in areas 2 and 3 at level 31 or 32, and only 5% of the time. Venomoth is the bug poison type poison moth Pokemon. The dust-like scales covering its wings are color-coded to indicate the kinds of poison it has. In terms of the games, that doesn't really mean much at all, as it learns the standard poison powder that pretty much all poison types learn. And it can learn Toxic, with those two being the only poison moves the original Venomoth can know. I feel like that Pokédex entry is more applicable to its original Jungle card, where it can use Shift to change its type. I also just think Venomoth is okay, but also, it is my favorite Jungle card in that set, so it has that going for it. And our last repeat encounter here is actually a counterpart to Venonat. Venonat are found prior to the Safari Zone if you take the south of Lavender Town path, but if you take the Cycling Road path, you'll encounter wild Doduo on routes 16, 17, and 18. Some nice symmetry there. I don't know why it's like this with Venonat and Doduo of all Pokemon, but here we are. Doduo is the normal flying type twin bird Pokemon, a bird that makes up for its poor flying with its fast foot speed, leaves giant footprints. And yeah, Doduo is pretty much attack and speed with everything else pretty low. And contrary to its Pokédex, it actually can learn Fly as well as Sky Attack, two very airborne moves, so its poor flying can't be all that poor. Doduo is found in areas 1 and 3 15% of the time at only level 26. It evolves into Dodrio at level 31, who is actually a Pokemon you cannot find here in the Safari Zone. The pattern has been broken. Which leaves 7 more Pokemon you can find in the grass, and for all 7 of them, this is either the only place in the game to find them, or it's the first place you can find them. Let's check out these debuts, baby. The most common new one here is Execute, the grass psychic type egg Pokemon that is often mistaken for eggs. Wait, it just said it is the egg Pokemon, what? When disturbed, they quickly gather and attack in swarms. And yes, this is the only place in the entire game to find an Execute, and it can absolutely be worthwhile to get. It alone isn't crazy good or anything, but it can evolve into Executor when exposed to a Leaf Stone, and Executor is no joke. If you were making a team of the strongest non-legendary Pokemon in Gen 1, I feel like Executor would make the cut for most people. But you will find Execute here 20% of the time in all 4 areas at a level range of 23 to 27. I've never really liked Execute as a Pokemon, but it certainly is strange. Also, Grass Psychic is a pretty cool combo, especially for Gen 1. These two were the only Grass primary Psychic secondary Pokemon that existed until Iron Leaves in Gen 9. Fun fact. Next is another Safari Zone exclusive, Rhyhorn, the ground rock type Spikes Pokemon. Its massive bones are 1,000 times harder than human bones. It can easily knock a trailer flying. I always loved how specific that is. What, did the person writing this have a bad experience with a Rhyhorn in their trailer? What other vehicles can it knock away flying? Rhyhorn is another very imbalanced Pokemon with honestly pretty great HP, attack, and defense, but horrendous special and speed. The low special does matter because it can weirdly learn Thunderbolt, Thunder, and Fire Blast too. I actually really like Rhyhorn though, it's a pretty sweet design. They are found in the center area and area 2 15% of the time at levels 25 or 26. It evolves into Rhydon at level 42, so you would have a ways to go. But now we're getting to the real rarities here. I'm talking the highest percent chance at finding any of these final 5 is 4%, so you better have your Safari Zone calculator handy. Or just throw balls or whatever. Catching these can be incredibly time consuming to both find and catch, and yes, some are exclusive to the Safari Zone. First up, we have a pair of bugs, one exclusive to blue and one to red. In the red version, if you're lucky, you will find Scyther, the bug flying type mantis Pokemon. With ninja-like agility and speed, it can create the illusion that there is more than one. And yeah, Scyther is just awesome and very intimidating looking. I mean, its arms are literal scythes. How does anything survive against this thing? Scyther is known for attack and speed, and is a pretty great addition to the team if you can get one. It's in the center area with a 4% rate at level 23, and even rarer in area 1 with only a 1% rate, but at a higher level 28. However, it isn't only found here in the Safari Zone in the red version. You can also get it from the Celadon Game Corner for 5,500 coins as another option. At least in Gen 1, Scyther does not evolve into anything, but it's still a very worthwhile team member. In Scyther's blue version pairing is Pinsir, the pure bug-type stag beetle Pokemon. If it fails to crush the victim in its pinchers, it will swing it around and toss it hard. Yeah, no thanks. They went all out with Scyther and Pinsir being scary as heck. If you aren't getting sliced in half by scythes, then you have this thing that can crush you to death with its head spikes, or whatever is going on with its terrifying mouth. I do prefer Scyther to Pinsir, but Pinsir is a pretty underrated design. I've never heard anyone say Pinsir is their favorite Pokemon, but it would not surprise me if it was. It's pretty horrifying. It actually has pretty high attack and defense and would be a great team addition, but again, I feel like Scyther is always the preferred Pokemon of the two. Pinsir is found in the same areas at the same rates as Scyther, just in the blue version. Also, the Celadon Game Corner as a secondary option. Way deep in areas 2 and 3, you'll find Tauros, the pure normal type wild bull Pokemon. When it targets an enemy, it charges furiously while whipping its body with its long tails. Tauros is exclusive to the Safari Zone in Red and Blue, and honestly isn't too bad. It has pretty high attack, defense, and speed, and yeah, I kinda love Tauros actually. I didn't care much for it at first, but my mind was changed when it became a ride Pokemon in Gen 7 of all things. It actually made me really like Tauros for some reason. But Tauros is found at level 26 in Area 3 at a 4% chance, or at level 28 in Area 2 at a 1% chance. And yeah, it flees. Tauros is actually the Pokemon that comes to mind when I think of the OG Safari Zone. But that leaves the two you just saw in captivity out in that super cool Fuchsia City Zoo. You can indeed find both Kangaskhan and Chansey here as the two very rare encounters. Another Safari Zone exclusive, Kangaskhan is found in Area 1 4% of the time, and in Area 3 1% of the time at levels 25 and 28. Kangaskhan is the pure normal type parent Pokemon where the infant rarely ventures out of its mother's protective pouch until it is 3 years old. They are pretty well rounded statistically, all aside from special, which is quite low. But Kangaskhan is never really one I think about too much either, aside from my many TCG runs on the Game Boy Color. It's a pretty notorious card there. But in terms of Red and Blue, I never really used Kangaskhan on any of my teams. It's rare to find and hard to catch, so it mostly just kind of exists to me. And finally, our last grass encounter is Chansey, the pure normal type egg Pokemon. It's a rare and elusive Pokemon that is said to bring happiness to those who manage to get it. I always thought Chansey was the single rarest Pokemon in the Safari Zone, but actually no, it's found just as often as the last few I've been talking about. However, it's typically the hardest one to catch here. It's in the center area and Area 2 at a 1% and 4% rate at levels 23 and 26. And it's also actually not a Safari Zone exclusive, although this is the first place in the game you can find one. It does appear in the Cerulean Cave in the post-game stuff as well. But from a game standpoint, Chansey is just all over the place. It has insanely high HP and really high special, but ridiculously low attack and defense. Like among the lowest of any Pokemon even still, so it's not necessarily worth using. Chansey got an evolution in Gen 2 of Blissey and then a baby form in Gen 4 of Happiny, but in the originals, it was a lone wolf. The last thing to quickly mention is that you can also find Lickitung here, but only in the Japanese Pocket Monsters Blue version, weirdly enough. The only way to get Lickitung in the English version is to make a trade on Route 18, but yeah, the Japanese version has a wild Lickitung here. But oh, we're not even done with Red and Blue. If you decide to do some fishing, you'll be able to find 7 different Pokemon, and only 6 of them are actual water types. As always, with an old rod, you will catch Magikarp 100% of the time, so I honestly don't think it's even worth going over. Every body of water in the game will get you a Magikarp with an old rod. There's nothing Safari Zone about it, it's Magikarp. And honestly, it's the same thing for Poliwag and Goldeen with a good rod. They're found in every body of water with a good rod, not much more to say about them. I'm not downplaying these Pokemon at all, I mean Gyarados and Poliwrath are awesome, but these 3 are quite literally everywhere where there's water. But the Super Rod is where things get switched up a little bit here, and what's pretty interesting about it is that you'll find the same 4 Pokemon with a Super Rod in all 4 areas, and they all have a 25% encounter rate and are always level 15. The same odds and level no matter where you are. But easily the most common find in other areas of the game as well is Krabby, the pure water type river crab Pokemon. Krabby's pinchers are not only powerful weapons, they are used for balance when walking sideways. I don't really have a whole lot to say about Krabby. It's a crab with very high attack and very low HP in special, and it evolves into Kingler at 28. Krabby is found in 12 different places in Red and Blue, so it's also almost not worth talking about, but I did it anyway. It's 1/4 of the Super Rod experience here. The Safari Zone is one of 6 places in the game where you can fish to find Psyduck, the pure water type duck Pokemon. While lulling its enemies with its vacant look, this wily Pokemon will use psychokinetic powers. It's been said numerous times before, but why Psyduck and Golduck aren't part psychic type is beyond me. It even mentions psychokinetic right there. But Psyduck is a bit of a fan favorite, especially thanks to the one Misty has in the anime. But I don't know, I've never really been a huge Psyduck fan personally. It's fine. Is that a hot take? It's just a yellow duck that gets headaches. It's not bad, it's fine. Psyduck evolves into Golduck at level 33 and statistically is very close to being perfectly even across the board. Then the Safari Zone is one of only 4 places where you can get Slowpoke, the water psychic type dopey Pokemon. Yeah, Slowpoke is part psychic but not Psyduck, alright. But Slowpoke is incredibly slow and dopey. It takes 5 seconds for it to feel pain when under attack. Slowpoke is also found in Route 10, Celadon City, and the Seafoam Islands, and it's another one that I think is just fine. Statistically, it does live up to its name by having incredibly low speed, but pretty decent HP. It evolves into Slowbro at level 37, and was given the alternate evolution of Slowking in Gen 2. And lastly, we have the almost Safari Zone exclusive of Dratini, the pure dragon-type dragon Pokemon. It was long considered a mythical Pokemon until recently when a small colony was found living underwater. And that water is right here in the Safari Zone, apparently. But Dratini can also be purchased in the Celadon Game Corner right alongside Scyther or Pinsir. Dratini itself doesn't excel at anything statistically and is also very well-rounded, but it eventually becomes one of the strongest Pokemon in the game, so it can definitely be worth getting. Also, of course, these are the only dragons originally. It evolves into Dragonair at level 30, and finally Dragonite at 55. But whew, that covers every encounter in Red and Blue. It's not an enormous variety or anything, but being able to find 23 different Pokemon here certainly makes things interesting, and worth spending your time here. It can be both very fun and very frustrating looking for Pokemon here, especially if you finally find a rare one you've been looking for and then it just runs away. But it really does stand out quite a bit among the rest of the game. I remember learning about it for the first time and being really excited to go see the new ones I would find. But even if you aren't looking for any specific Pokemon, the Safari Zone is still mandatory to finish the game because of the HM for Surf and the gold teeth to get the HM for Strength, both necessary to get to the Elite Four. There are also some pretty decent items around, like stat increasing items of Carbos and Protein, the TMs for Egg Bomb, Skull Bash, and Double Team, and some revives and max potions and stuff. It really is fun exploring here, even if you are ultimately whipping rocks at Pokemon just trying to live their lives. At least it takes Slowpoke 5 seconds to feel it. As far as the yellow version goes, you'll find a lot of the same Pokemon with a few differences. Also, all of the levels and encounter rates are switched up here, but I won't bother going over every single one. The one notable difference is that they've made Tauros easier to find here, so that's pretty neat. But what I will say is that this time, both Scyther and Pinsir can be found here, so that's kinda cool. As far as the Pokemon omissions go, you can no longer find Venonat, Venomoth, or Doduo here in the grass, taking away the ones you find depending on your Fuchsia City path. Instead, they added 3 newbies. In areas 1, 2, and 3, you will now find Cubone, the pure ground-type lonely Pokemon. The yellow deck says, it wears the skull of its deceased mother. Its cries echo inside the skull and come out as a sad melody. And yeah, I already talked about Cubone in my Lavender Town video because it was originally only in the Pokemon Tower. This time, they added Cubone here, and I don't know, I'm not really sure why. Yellow is heavily based on the anime, and Ash doesn't find a Cubone in the Safari Zone or anything, so it's kind of a strange choice. Cubone is very much associated with Lavender Town to me. But yeah, it has pretty great defense, very low speed, and evolves into Marowak at level 28. You'll find Cubone here at levels 16 or 19 with a varying 5 and 10% rate. But oh boy, Marowak is also another addition here, the pure ground type Bone Keeper Pokemon. Small and weak, this Pokemon is adept with its Bone Club. It has grown more vicious over the ages. Small and weak? I mean, it's not that bad. Its defense is actually very high, and yeah, I like Marowak. It's kinda cool that it uses a bone as a weapon, and now the Skull Cubone War is its head. Like it's grown up to become a hardened renegade or something. Very Punisher or Charles Bronson or whatever. But where to find Marowak completely changed here from Red and Blue. There, it's only found in Victory Road and Cerulean Cave, and in Yellow, it's exclusive to the Safari Zone. But you can still find Cubone in Pokemon Tower, so you could still get one prior to here. Marowak are only found here at level 24, 5% of the time, and in areas 1 and 3. And our last new one is Tangela, the pure grass-type vine Pokemon. Its identity is obscured by masses of thick blue vines. The vines are said to never stop growing. Tangela has pretty great defense and special though, and remained a Solomon until given an extra evolution of Tangrowth in Gen 4. But yeah, never really been a big fan of Tangela. A blue vine ball with eyes and red shoes. It's just kinda whatever. But originally, it was only found on Route 21, which you could only get to by surfing south of Pallet Town or north of Cinnabar Island, or in a trade there. But now, it's exclusive to the Safari Zone, and this change I kinda like actually. I feel like a place called a Safari Zone should have some grass Pokemon around. If I think of a safari, I picture tall grass and long stretches of land, and the only grass Pokemon you can find here in Red and Blue are Paras, Parasect, and Execute. Tangela being here just kinda fits. You'll find it in the center area and area 3 at a rare 4 or 1% rate at levels 22 or 27. As far as fishing, things have also changed a bit. The old rod still gets you Magikarp, the good rod still gets Poliwag and Goldeen, no change there. However, it got much worse with the Super Rod. You can no longer find Krabby, Psyduck, or Slowpoke here. Dratini is still found here, but its rate dropped from 25% to 20% in the center area, and all the way down to 10% in the rest. So what else can you find here instead? Well, Magikarp. Oh. Yeah, at a whopping 90% rate in the latter 3 areas, your Super Rod will get you either a level 5, 10, or 15 Magikarp. What is with the fishing nerf in Yellow? Was finding a Slowpoke here way too powerful or something? What a weird change. However, they did add one thing here, but only in the center area. Magikarp is found 70% of the time, Dratini 20%, so that leaves 10% where you can actually find a level 15 Dragonair. I guess this is kinda cool, but you're still going to have to get it from level 15 all the way to 55 to get Dragonite. Dragonair is the pure dragon-type dragon Pokemon that, according to a witness, its body was surrounded by a strange aura that gave it a mystical look. And I've always said that I think Dragonair is the coolest of the 3. I'm not a Dragonite fan, and Dragonair is just much more majestic looking than Dratini. It's a pretty sweet design, and now, I guess, you can catch a level 15 one here, and only here. But yeah, that's about it for the Yellow differences, aside from the many different encounter rates and levels. I think I still prefer how it is in Red and Blue overall, and especially with the fishing, but adding both Scyther and Pinsir, as well as Tangela, is a nice touch. But I think Venonat, Venomoth, and Doduo are more fitting than Cubone and Marowak, even though I do like them. So then let's see what they chose to do with the FireRed and LeafGreen remakes. And well, the answer is, yeah, not a whole lot was changed from Red and Blue. You find the exact same 16 Pokemon in the grass, and Scyther is exclusive to FireRed and Pinsir to LeafGreen. But yeah, the rest are identical, just with some altered levels and encounter rates. Venonat, Venomoth, and Doduo were brought back, so you cannot find Cubone, Marowak, or Tangela here. However, Pokemon in the water were definitely changed, so let's check that out. Also, the step count was upped from 500 to 600 here, so now you can turn your pretty head and walk away. You can now surf here, and it's kinda cool with what they did. In FireRed, you'll find Psyduck 100% of the time, anywhere from levels 20 to 40 in all 4 areas. Yikes. In LeafGreen, you will find Slowpoke 100% of the time. Kind of a fun change there. The 2 vacant expression Pokemon. Fishing is also a little different, but not with the old rod. It's always Magikarp every time. The good rod still yields Poliwag and Goldeen, but now also Magikarp. But hey, you could get a level 15 one now, that much closer to Gyarados. As far as the Super Rod though, we actually get a new encounter here. 40% of the time you'll now find Goldeen with the Super Rod, but you can also find its evolved form of Seaking, also with a 40% rate. Seaking is the pure water goldfish Pokemon. The horn on its head is sharp like a drill. It bores a hole in a boulder to make its nest. Seaking is also pretty well rounded statistically, and yeah, I kinda like its addition here, especially if Goldeen was originally here anyway. Seaking is always one that never stands out to me and tends to be one of the more forgettable Gen 1 Pokemon though, but it's not a bad design. It's just a one-horned goldfish with a cool color scheme, just not one I ever really think about. But 15% of the time you'll find Dratini here per usual. Psyduck and Slowpoke are now found 4% of the time, but sticking to their exclusive versions. But I mean, since you can just surf to find them 100% of the time, finding one while fishing kinda sucks, especially because you get surf in the Safari Zone. But with a tiny 1% rate, they did bring back Dragonair here too, now found at a level range of 25 to 35, potentially 20 levels higher than the one from Yellow. A rare find indeed. As for items, there are some new things to find. You can get 2 Leaf Stones here, a Quick Claw, and some new TMs of Sunny Day, Steel Wing, and the return of Double Team. Also, of course, Surf and Gold Teeth for strength. So on to the Let's Go games. These are always usually fun to see just how different things get with the visible wild Pokemon in wait, there's no Safari Zone. Wow, yeah, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee took out the Safari Zone entirely. Instead, it was replaced by Go Park, where you can transfer Pokemon from Pokemon Go here. So, I mean, it sort of acts like a Safari game where you gotta catch your own Pokemon, but no, it's not the same thing at all. Pretty disappointing, but that's how it goes. Ah well, at least it's always fun to see what they chose to do with those areas in Gold and Silver. These take place 3 years later. Let's see what had become of the Safari Zone this time. And it's closed. Because the Warden is traveling abroad. Yeah, now I know exactly why Clark Griswold punched that moose at the end of National Lampoon's Vacation. What a letdown. I don't know, wasn't the Safari Zone one of the more memorable parts of the original games? However, apparently, there actually was a Safari Zone designed for Gold and Silver, and even had a layout, but they chose not to use it in the final game. Yet knowing this makes it being closed even more disappointing. However, with the remakes of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, they actually did bring back the Safari Zone, now located west of Cyanwood City in Johto. It is owned and operated by the same Fuchsia City Warden, but I feel like this should be its own video if I chose to go over it. It is widely different with completely new Pokemon, so it's not the same thing at all. There are now 6 different types of habitats to explore and an absolute ton of Pokemon. It's honestly pretty awesome, but again, this would have to be its own video. The Safari Zone concept was brought back again in the Hoenn region, and yet again in Sinnoh, known there as the Great Marsh. Kalos has the Friend Safari, which is pretty similar, and the concept of the Pal Park has a lot of similarities as well. The Pal Park allows you to catch Gen 3 Pokemon in Gen 4 once you've completed the National Dex, where you essentially go on a safari to catch them. This is also relevant because in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, the Pal Park is what replaces the Fuchsia City Safari Zone. Lastly, one could argue that the entire game of Legends Arceus is essentially a Safari Zone. The whole concept of the game is to wander around Hisui in a 3D environment to throw balls and food at wild Pokemon to catch. I would also even argue that Pokemon Snap is more true to an actual safari than the Safari Zone is. You are taking pictures of Pokemon in their natural habitat while throwing food and pester balls. A different form of capturing, but yeah, pretty close to being the same thing. But the point is, this concept is kind of a fan favorite, going all the way back to Fuchsia City in the original games. It presents itself as kind of a side minigame, and it functions differently from anything else in the game. Except it can absolutely have an impact on your experience, since you can add any Pokemon you catch to your team. It is by no means a waste of time. Unless you have no interest in using anything found there, then it's quite literally an obstacle since you have to go there in order to get Surf and Strength. But basically, it's a really fun addition to the game if you choose to ignore the fact that you're essentially throwing rocks at poor wild animals. But we just pretend that isn't how it works. As far as side games, the Kanto Safari Zone is an area in Pokemon Pinball as well. Not a whole lot to say about it, except it's where you can add both Nidoran, Paras, Doduo, Rhyhorn, Chansey, Scyther, Pinsir, Tauros, and Grimer. Grimer? Really? But oh, we still aren't done yet. As you know from this series, we gotta go over the Safari Zone in the anime and manga, and it certainly appears in both. For the anime, so here's the thing. There was an episode dedicated to the Safari Zone in the original series, and it was episode 35, The Legend of Dratini, except this episode never made it to American audiences. And why is that? Well, Ash, Misty, and Brock are approaching the Safari Zone, much to Ash's excitement. Ash starts singing, soon to be joined by Pikachu, Misty, and Brock. A man yells at them to keep quiet, and after Ash asks what his problem is, this bro straight up points a gun right at Ash's face. Yes, this legitimately happens, and it's pretty easy to understand why this one unaired in America. A man aims a gun point blank at a 10-year-old boy's face in Pokemon, and this is right at the beginning. But this man is actually the Safari Zone warden Kaiser. The elderly man that the townspeople name Slowpoke is portrayed a bit differently here. After explaining the rules of the game of safari balls, fishing rods, etc., he once again threatens Ash with his gun. After Misty asks him about an old picture of him with a Dratini, he doesn't want to talk about it and says there aren't any in the Safari Zone. Ash calls Professor Oak, who explains that many years ago, tons of people flocked to the Safari Zone to catch a legendary Dratini, destroying the land in the process. Since then, only safari balls are allowed. Team Rocket overhears this and challenges Ash to a Safari Zone competition. Ash catches a couple Tauros, one by accident, and then James and Jesse threaten Kaiser with a gun, wanting to know where Dratini is. Just guns everywhere in this episode. Where did all of this even come from? Team Rocket goes to the lake where Dratini are, and they actually do see one. Meowth wants to set off an electric bomb to electrocute all of the water Pokemon so they can catch all of them and win. Jesse does so, and Ash and Kaiser jump in to stop it. Just before Ash drowns, a Dragonair rescues him, allowing him to throw the bomb back at Team Rocket to have them blast off again. This Dragonair is the very same one Kaiser saw many years ago, now evolved. Back at the Warden's office, Professor Oak learns that Ash did indeed catch 30 Pokemon, except they were all Tauros. It's the only thing he could catch. So yeah, yikes. What a strange episode that just randomly introduced guns into the series. Definitely not a surprise that this one went unaired, but it's really too bad that an episode devoted to the Safari Zone was the one to get omitted, guns scenes aside. Ash competing with Team Rocket to catch the most Pokemon does sound like a fun episode idea, along with the joke that Ash keeps accidentally catching Tauros. Ash's 30 Tauros was brought up again, but not until episode 65, Showdown at the Poke Corral, which probably confused a lot of American viewers.
Yes, but they're almost all Tauros from the Safari Zone.
I don't really remember my reaction to it, as I did watch all of these when they aired, but I probably had just assumed Ash caught 30 of them off screen and that was that. But the episode heavily focusing on Dratini is pretty cool, although not what I expected. There aren't a ton of Safari Zone Pokemon featured here, just Tauros, Rhyhorn, Rhydon, Nidorina, Nidorino, and of course Dratini and Dragonair. Also a bunch of theoretical water types to show what Team Rocket's electric bomb would do, and there's even a Gyarados that Misty finds. But this is actually the only episode of the original anime to take place in the Safari Zone. It was mentioned in the 2 episodes before this one in the Flame Pokemonathon and the Kangaskhan Kid, but this is the one that goes down in notoriety for being a banned episode. But as always, the Safari Zone is just a passing thought in Pokemon Origins. Red catches a Chansey in the Safari Zone. That's it. Riveting stuff. Which just leaves the manga, and there aren't too many Safari Zone centered chapters. And I say this disclaimer in each of these videos, but my manga knowledge is virtually non-existent. Anything I say here, I'm just getting off of summaries, so if I get something wrong, my apologies. In Long Live the Nidoking of Pokemon Adventures, Red enters the Safari Zone and hops aboard a raft. He sees 2 Nidoking fighting over a Nidoqueen, and he tries to catch a Nidoking with a Pokeball he snuck in, but he instead catches the Nidoqueen. One of the enraged Nidokings chases Red through the Safari Zone, even injuring Red with acid on his leg, before Red hits this Nidoking in the eye with a rock. My god, maybe this whole Safari Zone is a horrendous idea after all. The chapter ends with a victory bell capturing Red to devour him. Well, that wasn't too enjoyable to read. In the sequel, A Hollow Victory Bell, Red is carried away by the Victory Bell to some deadly ritual amongst other Bellsprout and Weepinbell. The acid inside Victory Bell can dissolve anything in seconds, and it even horribly showcases this before Red is able to get free and capture Victory Bell among the others before he is able to escape the Safari Zone. I mean, wow, that got dark pretty quick. I know the manga isn't messing around a lot of times, but this is pretty brutal for Pokemon. In Rampage at the Safari Zone of Pokemon Pocket Monsters, I couldn't really find much about it. All Bulbapedia says is that Clefairy destroys the Safari Zone, and apparently there's a Tauros, a female Nidoran, and all of the fossil Pokemon. Yeah, I don't know, that's all I got. In Fuchsia City of Pokemon Zensho, Satoshi saves a Ditto from a Tauros in the Safari Zone, and gets a fishing rod from a fisherman in which he catches a Dratini. Satoshi finds the Warden's missing teeth, and on his way to return them, he gets ambushed by Koga. He defeats Koga with the help of the Ditto he saved earlier. And you get to see some images of a Chansey, Doduo, Rhyhorn, Kangaskhan, Slowpoke, Krabby, and Psyduck as well. A nice group of Safari Mons here. And that about does it for the Kanto Safari Zone. What a horrible place. If you aren't whipping rocks at wild Pokemon to try and remove them from their natural habitats, then you have the anime with the Warden threatening a 10-year-old with guns. Or the manga where Red pierces the eye of a wild Nidoking and is almost dissolved alive by acid. Yeah, this is not a safe place. However, with all that said, it's still a really fun place to explore in the original games, especially if you don't know what to expect. It can most certainly get very frustrating and time-consuming if you can't seem to catch that one you're looking for, or not knowing where to look. And if you aren't looking to catch anything at all, it's just a mandatory place you have to trek through to get Surfing Strength, which is ultimately just a waste of time. But I don't know, I still look back fondly on this place, and I feel like nobody was complaining when the variation of a Safari Zone was brought back in future games. It's a fun concept, and it's where a number of Pokemon were first introduced. I feel like Kangaskhan, Chansey, and Tauros are all the poster Pokemon for the Safari Zone too. I still like it, even with all of its questionable activity occurring here. So thanks again for joining me as we thoroughly look through another place in Kanto. Is there another place you'd like me to cover? Should I keep staying in Kanto or finally venture out to other regions? Let me know what you think, and as always, do check out my Patreon if you feel the need. Many thanks to everyone who has supported me at the end of the video. I'll see you all for the next area. Paraspectre will return.